Following on from that short history lesson, let's go into some more technical detail. We'll use a little bit of the history as we go through this. So what I want to do today is to go through the basic structure of an HTML document. It's really quite simple, and as such I don't really need to say too much about the structure of the course. All I'm going to do is cover what is a little bit more content than I managed to draw out to a quarter of an hour when in the first lecture I covered the fact that HTML is a language for describing the content of your documents. Now I'm going to give a little bit more structure, and hopefully I'm not going to go over a quarter of an hour to do that. So just what it says, some introduction to the content of an HTML document in terms of what sections need to be in there. So let's introduce that. You've seen a little bit on how the content is structured because I've introduced tags and elements. There are some specific tags which you need in a valid HTML document. We had an HTML document. First thing we need is the head of the document. So that's that's delimited by the head tags, and that's the first main element that will appear in your document. But as well as the head, we're going to have a body as well. So that's put everything that you need for the key parts, two key parts of an HTML document. The head is going to contain metadata, data about the document. The body is where the core content goes. So that's a starting point, but we're not quite there yet, because what we've got are two parts of a document tree, but we must have a single root node to keep everything together, and that's the HTML root node. So you see now we're beginning to form a tree-like structure with a single root node, HTML as the root node for a valid HTML document, and then two elements within that root element, which are the head and the body. As I said, head contains the metadata about the document, and a little in a lecture or two's time we'll see what goes in there, although we'll see a little bit about that today. And the body contains the main content of your document. There's one more thing we need to do. If you remember from the history lesson, and this was part of the reason for giving the history lesson, there are many variants of HTML. What we're doing in this lecture is using HTML5. So we need to tell the browser which variant we're using, and as the browser is going to parse our document on the basis of that information, that has to be the first thing the browser sees. So we're going to have to put in a doc type statement at the very beginning of the file. And now Mr. Markup is happy. He's got all that's needed to make a structure for an HTML document. Again, I'll go into a little bit more information about the doc type element in a later lecture, but you'll see for HTML5 it is a very simple statement. Doc type HTML. Now the parser is ready to know that we're using the HTML5 standard. It will then see, the next thing it'll see is the root node and begin to build up the document tree. So let's have a quick look at an example now of something which is a valid HTML document. Here's a very simple web page that should validate now. So we've got the doc type, first statement that needs to go into that file. Then we've got the root node HTML as a container for the rest of the document. We've got a head element that contains the the metadata about the document, and there are a number of optional fields that can go in there, and I'll go into those in the lecture about the head element. But one thing you must have is a title for your document. So that's required. All the other metadata is optional, although I will make a strong case that one of the fields you'd be a fool not to include, and we'll talk about that in the lecture about head elements. But as far as the standard goes, then title is a requirement for a valid HTML document. And then we move on to the body, and the body has the content that will appear in the browser window. So let's see how that renders. No styling there, and very little content yet. But notice what's happened is that title now appears in the browser menu bar. So that is good practice, but it is also important in terms of accessibility, so that the any reader understands what the title of the document is. So it's not just good practice, it is a requirement. So that field is necessary there. We'll talk about some of the other elements that go up to make the head in the next lecture. You see the content there, minimal content at the moment, but that is the part that comes from the body. So what you've learned very quickly, very short lecture, but an important one. Get all of those bits clear in your mind, that we've got two main components wrapped up by a root element called HTML. We must have a doc type in order for the browser or whatever other user agent is looking at your document. So the doc type will know which variant of HTML you're using, or XHTML if you're using one of those variants. Head is where the metadata goes, and you must have a title. I've put that one into our template there. And within the body, that's where the marked up content goes. So you start describing your content of the HTML document in the body. And in the next few lectures, we'll go into those elements in a little more detail.